everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Astroviews. It's the show where we talk to interesting people about their connection with the universe. Today, my guest is John Reed. He is a RASC member, avid volunteer, author. He's now an astronomer. He just finished a space degree, but he'll tell you all about that. He's a really sharp guy, really nice guy, and I'm really excited to have him on. So, hey, John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ryan. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you over the next half hour to an hour or so. And so I guess this is really about you. I want to ask you first, could you please introduce yourself a little bit and tell us kind of what you do in the astronomy and space world?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's John Reed, and but if you Google me, add the A in the middle because there are so many John Reeds, and I often get confused with other people, especially at the airport, where sometimes I've even been pulled off a plane to make sure that I'm, John A. Reed and not the criminal John Reed. But anyway, yeah. So as you said, I'm a recent astrophysics graduate from St. Mary's University here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and but my actual background, and I'll often call on this, even in astronomy, is in corporate finance, and so that's like managing the books and forward projections for a Fortune 500 company and preparing their leadership team to talk to Wall Street. And so that was what was the bulk of my career. So it's been interesting to see how some of that feeds into a career in the sciences. So that's been kind of cool as well. So and then my job is I've been working with the Burt-Gaffney Observatory as a telescope operator and a teaching assistant. So the school puts through hundreds of students into their first year astronomy program, and they so we teach them how to use telescopes and teach them about the night sky. So that's what I've been doing.
That's excellent. And you are also a published author. I want to talk a little bit about that too. What kind of books have you been writing?
So my most popular books. So I've written about 10 books, and the most popular ones are stargazing. So it all started with 50 things to see with a small telescope, and that one became almost a viral sensation about 5 years ago. And it all stemmed from just me stargazing. I was volunteering in California with the California State Park System and the Mount Diablo Astronomical Society and their outreach team. And so it was almost 4 nights a week. And so it was the same targets over and over, and about 10 different targets per season as sort of the sky turns over. And what we were doing had never been put really into words before. So when I finally went and did that, it was something that people really needed, and it really resonated with people. And that sort of brought me to where I am today.
That's really fantastic, and I'm really interested. I've been following your books a little bit recently since we last spoke, and so they're really cool. And I'm glad you're also publishing some more in the future, aren't you?
Absolutely. So this is going to be a 5-book year for me. So I'm three
Wow.
down, and I've got 2 more to go before the end of the year. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you're already at 3, and the year is just half over. So you've got lots of time to really work on those last 2.
Yeah, yeah. So when I say 5 total, it's 5 published. So some of these books have been years in the works. So 50 animals that have been to space, I think was conceived in 2017 or mid 2018. And that one just was released in March, right before COVID. And then 50 space missions that changed the world comes out this fall. That should be really interesting. And then we also created a 50 things to see with a telescope activity workbook, which we're hoping to get into schools, and that will act as sort of curriculum where science teachers can walk through the stargazing process with binoculars and telescopes, or just with the naked eye with their students.
That's amazing. Well, I wish you all the success in the world with that. I want to know, though, as a guy who was in corporate finance, it seems like the opposite end of the spectrum from a career in science and outreach. What led you to astronomy and space? Have you always had kind of an interest in it since you were young, or did you kind of come into it a lot later and then it just exploded and shifted your career?
It definitely exploded like a supernova, literally,
Nice.
later in life. Earlier, I had sort of parallel interests because I didn't really know that astronomy and astrophysics were a thing that you could do. That never really clicked until I was, living in the States and in the Bay Area and almost surrounded by these these people and these organizations that had to do with space. But early on, I was a Star Trek nerd. I was an air cadet. I got my pilot's license. I didn't, and I was surrounded by all these really people that were energized nerds, I guess. We all like Star Trek, but there were no astronomers amongst them. So I didn't really understand that it was a field that you could really dive into at that point. And so I actually studied aerospace engineering for a semester at Carleton in Ottawa. And I never met that astronomy crowd, that the people that were on the science side of things, just the engineering side. And I didn't resonate very much with the engineering side of things very well at all. And what I knew from my parents' background was business. And so I switched to business. The mathematics was my strong suit. So I did finance.
Oh, that's excellent. And now you've shifted right over. What was kind of the catalyst for the change? You're working in corporate finance in California. Did you just all of a sudden one day decide to up and, hey, I'm going to go do astronomy instead?
Well, it was very gradual. So I knew I loved astronomy after it was probably the first big telescope. And I'm like, well, I got to share that. I think people are missing out. So many people have telescopes. Like I actually had a telescope growing up, and I had binoculars, but I never got them into focus and to seeing Saturn. And I didn't, there was something missing. Like maybe Jupiter was there, maybe Saturn was up, and I pointed the telescope at it and never got it in focus. So I just didn't have that little bit of knowledge to push me over the end to get that wow, that aha moment. It just never came as a kid. And so my thought, as I got this bigger telescope and learned how to use it, was that I can fix that. I can give that wow to this next generation of kids and of young people, or even, people that are older and well into their careers as well. I can give them that feeling of amazement of seeing Saturn for the first time, of seeing the Orion Nebula, and really being blown away by it, and so that led me to volunteer. That led me to write this book. And then once the book started doing well, and I realized that there was a business case there, and I could slowly start planning my way away from corporate America and towards astronomy, that's when I knew that that my path was definitely going in a new direction. And my first thought was, I'm going to jump out of corporate America and into NASA. So we actually had a house picked out in Washington, D.C., had real estate agents and everything. And we put our house up on the market. I didn't tell anyone at the company that I was planning to make this jump. And at the same time, I applied to St. Mary's University. And the NASA job was going to be a budgeting position that I had applied to. And, it paid pretty well, but it was basically the same thing I was doing in the corporate world, but at least it would get me, into NASA. And ultimately what happened is our house in the Carolinas never sold. And so, well, the only thing that we can do now, that we could afford to do and still have me, sort of break out of the mold, was, because St. Mary's is in Canada, we can move to Canada and live for a heck of a lot cheaper than we can in the States, where you got to pay $2,000 a month for health insurance. And so we could move to Canada on our budget, and on the book wasn't making that much money at the time, but it was in Canada, it was enough to make it through the degree. I'm like, I can live 4 years if we rent a small place on that book budget. And then so we pulled the trigger. We didn't sell the house in the Carolinas. It didn't sell for almost 2 years. So that was a little bit painful. It was a big house, because I was living the corporate life. But we rented a small place in Halifax, Nova Scotia, wrote another book. The other book did really well as well. And, and so that was it. We had fully transitioned after that point.
That's a really amazing story. It's really exciting. Are you from the Maritimes originally? Like, where are you from originally?
Yeah, so I was born here in Halifax, and I went to Ottawa for aerospace engineering, but finished the degree back here in Halifax at St. Mary's. And the business school here is really, really, really good. And the experience you get with the co-op programs coming out of it really set me up to hit the ground running for a big fancy job in the States. When I interviewed down there, I was really a shoo-in for the position just because of the experience I'd gotten at St. Mary's University.
That's amazing. Now you've just finished your 4-year astronomy degree. Your career as an author is going really, really well. Uh, do you have any regrets about leaving the corporate world, leaving the U.S., all that stuff?
Yeah, I have a huge regret, and that's not doing it earlier. We definitely could have pulled the trigger, maybe a year earlier, and things would have worked out. And if we realized how really awesome the standard of living is in Canada, because I really didn't know. I lived my whole adult life in the States, and you have it pretty good there if you've got a cushy job because you get sort of Cadillac healthcare, which only costs you $500 a month if you're working. And so you're like, yeah, we got it pretty well. We can afford a big house, you know, and you work 10 hours a day and you commute for an hour and a half. But, in Canada, at least in Halifax, none of those things that like would you don't know are degrading your quality of life. None of them even exist here. My commute here is 3 minutes. Our healthcare is included in taxes. I can be an author working. I work about 4 hours a day of actual work, and the rest is just busy work, checking emails and getting by. And so the standard of life in the Maritimes doing what I'm doing is just much higher than it was, in the States in a corporate job.
So now that you're in the space world fully, you're an astrophysicist now. What are your goals in astronomy? What did the next 10 years look like for you, or even beyond? Do you have those big career goals, those big aspirations? What are you working toward?
Ultimately, I need to dive in and actually grow into that astrophysics, I guess, persona or career, because you sort of are what you do. So right now, I consider myself more an author. I've got 2 kids, another one on the way. So from a career standpoint, the best thing I can do with my time right now is take 2 years, grow my author, and I think of it as a business, grow my author business with Stellar Publishing. That's my company. And we're going to have this other kid. And then when that's done, I'll probably dive back into academia because the school wants me to do my master's degree and, teach first year physics and all this stuff. And I'm like, whoa, I just graduated. It was so, I guess stepping back a bit, the astrophysics degree was by far the hardest thing I've ever done. Like I say our standard of living and stuff was much higher here than it was in the States. That's true, but it wasn't easy by any chance. The astrophysics was going through that was insanely difficult, and so to dive right back in, especially with a kid on the way and books that need to be written, it's hard to do everything you want all at once. So the next 10 years is sort of like spread out from from a goal standpoint anyway. But I'll definitely dive back in soon.
Well, that's great. It's nice to be able to continue your education. I was filming an interview recently, and I was talking to the guest about this kind of idea as a lifelong learner, and I think that's a scientist thing in general. A lot of people who aren't scientists do that as well, but I find most scientists I meet are always like, oh, hey, I was learning about this, or I was reading about this, or I was looking at this paper. And I think that really gets ingrained in you, especially in the sciences. I'm sure you found that as well with your degree.
Oh, absolutely. It's a constant diving down rabbit holes with me. So
That's
um,
fantastic. To get into a little bit of the lighter side, you're a guy who's an observer, a huge observer. I mean, you've written books on observing for kids, and you teach lots of other people how to observe. So I think this is a good question for you, but what is your favorite celestial object and why? And it can be more than one. I've had most guests select several, so feel free to really dive into this one.
yeah. So as you said, I'm first and foremost a visual observer. So I've been trying to dabble into astrophotography. I got some images of the comet there, but I'm by no means I'm a very amateur astrophotographer. So for me, it's all about the visual experience. Or it's up to this point, it's been about visual astronomy in the amateur astronomy world. And what I really got into the last year, so I wrote a book called 50 Things to See on the Moon. And I dove into that book without being a lunar observer. And I definitely came out of it a lunatic. You know, you become very moon aware is so what they call us. And it's been interesting. So I always know in my mind, you know, where the moon is in its phase, you know, where it is in its orbit. You know, I'll know if I look out the window, you know, oh, it's right there. And you know, and if it's up and I've got a telescope, you know, I'm definitely looking at it. I'm getting my phone out and photographing it through the telescope. And so that was sort of an obsession that lasted, you know, almost 2 years at this point.
Well, you haven't turned into a werewolf yet, right?
Not quite. Soon.
That's perfect. What a good answer. That's a great one, and it's also the first thing that so many people observe in their lives. It's something we're all very connected to as well in the moon. So that's a really great choice. Now that you've learned a lot about other astronomers throughout history, or just other scientists, is there anybody that you would really want to have a lunch with for an hour? Like if you could pick someone's brain, living or dead, who would you choose?
Oh my gosh, that is such an easy question. And I wonder if this is the same answer for everyone and for everyone in sort of physics. And that would be Isaac Newton by a long shot. And I think what would be so cool about that, and maybe it's because I'm obsessed with time travel and sort of alternate realities, like any movie that is time travel or like comas, because a coma is sort of like time travel for the character. Um, yeah, it's kind of weird. I like movies about time travel and comas. It's my theme. Anyway, so if I could go back in time and meet Isaac Newton, like any formula that's in my head and I just verbalize to Isaac Newton would change the course of history, would accelerate scientific progress by hundreds of years. Like what if you went to Isaac Newton and said, oh yeah, E equals MC squared, or here's the formula for gravity, and just save him like 20 years of coming up with it, you know? And then he could get on to even other more amazing things. Like maybe he would be, you know, discover all the thing, you know, the field theory that Einstein did, or you could show, you know, Isaac Newton spectroscopy, which would be pretty easy. You know, you've probably got, you know, prisms lying around from optic stuff. I play with prisms. So show them a prism, get some thermometers out, show them where infrared light is. You know, get a microscope, point it at the spectrum and show them absorption lines from the sun. Like there's all sorts of things that you could do to just, you'd have a fantastic conversation and you would totally accelerate the scientific revolution by hundreds of years.
Well, that's a great choice and a very altruistic idea as well. Like you know, some people were like, "Oh, I want to talk to Einstein because he'd be a cool guy to have lunch with," or, you know, but you're saying Isaac Newton because I want to accelerate the science, the revolution that he created. So we would be a lot further ahead if we could go back and give Newton some of that extra info that we have today, right?
Yeah, show him the Schrodinger equation. Why not?
Jeez, I'm sure he'd be able to comprehend it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, he did invent the calculus that makes it work.
Now, I would never ever ask a parent to choose their favorite child, but I will ask an astronomer to choose their favorite telescope. You've got a few great looking instruments in the background there. Do you have a favorite?
Oh my word. So I have about a dozen telescopes. Yeah, what are my favorites? Well, the best telescope is the one that you use. And there's one that's really been completely blowing my mind right now. And my mother-in-law bought it for me, but because I put it on my Christmas list, I'm like, yeah, there's a spotting scope. It's designed for rifle ranges, right? And so I put this scope on my Christmas list and it was $129. I actually have it here. It comes in this little bag, which is also big enough to fit the mount for the scope. So this mount, this top section fits in this little bag as well. And now I take this scope everywhere. So I took it to Hawaii last year. I took it to the Cayman Islands this year, right before COVID. Been Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Toronto. And it's this little guy. It's a Celestron C90. The contrast is, and so it's a high magnification scope. So it's not necessarily for beginners looking to explore and learn the night sky. It's for people that want to dive in. Like, it barely fits the full moon in the frame. It's got so much magnification. This is a beast. But I hooked it up to a professional astronomy camera, and which is over there somewhere. And so I've got this camera that you cool down to -10 degrees, and I put it on this mount, tracked it with some nebula and got amazing photos with it. I'm like, this is a $129 telescope. I add $3,000 worth of camera equipment, and we get photos that are just as good as with, a $2,000 telescope. And so if you're wondering what my favorite scope is, this is it. And so I use this to photograph the Mars occultation this year. So Mars went behind the moon. So I got a video of that with this scope. You get great videos of with just your phone and Jupiter. You can use a video and then use a program called PIPP to convert it to an AVI, drop it into Registax, converts videos to pictures, and you get great pictures of Jupiter and Saturn. And I've had more fun with this little telescope that I could practically fit in my pocket of a trench coat or something than even the big $250,000 telescope I get to play with at St. Mary's. So for a fun factor, the Celestron C90 is where it's at. Does that answer your question?
That's a great answer. It's really funny to me how, a lot of beginners, they get in and they're like, oh, the bigger telescopes are obviously better. The more expensive telescopes are obviously better. But then as you get more experienced, you learn that sometimes portability is a really important thing, right? And I certainly find that myself, as most of the observing runs I do are with a much smaller scope than my 8-inch 75 pounder with the giant mount. It's a lot easier to be on the road and go to a dark sky site and take that little telescope that has a lot of versatility. And so that seems like that's the one for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bit of a learning curve to going back to smaller telescopes, though, because you have to be more precise in your pointing. A lot of them come with mounts that don't support the telescope, so it makes them harder to aim. And so that's where a lot of people fall short. They'll have a small telescope, but it's difficult to use. And some of the big, like a big Dobsonian telescope, is ridiculously easy to use. It's ridiculously, if you have an 8-inch Dobsonian, to get that wow, to just swing it around, no computers or anything, just point it at that bright thing. Oh, it's Saturn, you get the rings. Whereas that can be a little bit more challenging with a little scope like this. But after you know how to use the little scope, they're a lot of fun.
You've done a lot of interesting space things. You've done a lot of observing. What advice would you give to someone younger who really wants to get into this? Maybe there's somebody out there in the corporate world who wants to leave, just like you did. Maybe there's some young kids who are a little bit shy about getting that first telescope. What advice would you give to all of those young people who want to become astronomers, amateur or professional, and anything else to do with space?
Yeah, so definitely a massive gap learning-wise between the professional astronomer side and the amateur astronomy. So professional astronomy, the advice on that end is learn math. If you're in high school, it's math. Get those math grades up. University is going to be all about calculus. I remember about the end of third year university, our one of our mechanics professors was like, listen, this course, that's it. He's like, you've taken every calculus course there is. There's no more. And that was really interesting. And then I went and counted up all the calculus courses I'd taken, and it was like dozens. And so, or courses with a foundation in calculus. And so you really you don't have to love mathematics necessarily. I don't love mathematics. I got through it on grit. I don't think I have a natural ability for mathematics. I just don't find it I just didn't find it a barrier. And so if you love space, you can still go for it, even if you're not, a math person, because I'm definitely not. But it can be a barrier for a lot of people. On the amateur side, that's different. So there's two approaches. So there's people that want to just be wowed, I guess, and then there's people that want to really learn the night sky. So if you really want to get and learn everything about the night sky, and you don't care necessarily about these wow factors, these like these social media dopamine rushes that you can get from seeing a comet or seeing Saturn or something. If you want to really dive in, it's all about joining a club and meeting other people and interacting with them and going to lectures. And there's so many free lectures around. Any city is going to have free astronomy lectures at their local astronomy clubs. The universities have usually every Friday they have someone come in and do a talk, and that's open to the public. So you can usually just call your local astronomy department and see if you have one of these lectures that's open to the public, and they're usually on Fridays. And the department can tell you, yes, this professor is visiting from Harvard. It's usually a fancy school too, so it's really neat to meet all these people. And so as an amateur and someone who's just fascinated with space, you can really get involved, meet these famous people, at least in the astronomy world, and sort of dive into it from that angle. The other angle is sort of the wow angle. Like, I just want to get into my backyard and see cool stuff. And I actually find that that's most people. Most people are just backyard astronomers, and their goal is to be amazed, not necessarily to learn everything there is to know about black holes and stuff. They just want that wow. And the best thing I can say for that is don't rely on apps and go-to telescopes and everything. You really do want to get a guidebook, even though that can sort of feel unwowy. But like that's what 50 Things to See with a Telescope is all about. You open it, there's something cool you want to see, you can instantly point your telescope at it without a lot of effort. And I think that's what I find. I've just, in my experience, that's been most of the general public that I've worked with fall into that category. The type of people that want to learn about the sky at a very intimate level, usually they need to start with binoculars in a lawn chair in their backyard, and then go to the clubs and the lectures and everything. And then the other class of people, the ones that want the wow, they tend to be the ones that get into, they want to start photographing, and I find that they become the future astrophotographers, taking these amazing shots and throwing them up on social media. Like, I think it's Dylan O'Donnell from Australia. He's got one of the most popular pages. And then Trevor, who runs Astro Backyard. I mean, these are people that I feel like they chase the wow. And I feel like they're what most people look up to when they're getting into the hobby as well.
I'm going to ask you now to pull out your crystal ball and tell me, what do you think is coming down the pipeline for astronomy? What is the next big discovery going to be in, say, the next 10 years, and maybe even the next 50 years if we want to extend it a little bit?
Yeah, so the next big discoveries, I guess you have to define big. And because if we think about what have been the big discoveries, and it's been a while since one, I feel like, really changed the world. So you had 1995, we discovered planets outside the solar system, but I feel like a lot of people didn't even know, or maybe they already thought we had discovered planets outside the solar system. Now we've discovered, or confirmed maybe 4,000 of them, which is pretty cool. Most people don't care. A big one was discovering that other galaxies weren't part of our own galaxy, that they weren't nebulas, that the universe was expanding. Now we know the universe is expanding, and then we discover that the expansion is accelerating. Like, that sort of blows your mind. But is it sort of revolutionary? Is it changing the world? I don't know. But the one I think we can expect, as long as the James Webb Space Telescope, sort of the new Hubble, as long as that succeeds, we may get some really revolutionary discoveries like life on other planets. And it's not going to come in the form of little green men or aliens, but we're going to look at the spectrum of light coming from a star through that planet's atmosphere into the instruments in that telescope, and we're going to be like, there's organic molecules in that atmosphere that could only be from living things. And that's sort of step one. And then step two, and this is where you get to your 50-year time horizon, we'll probably, this is just speculation, we'll probably have a huge list built up of planets that we know have life on them just from the spectrum. And then it'll be a matter of, all right, now we're going to build some giant telescope, which will probably use interferometry. And if you don't know what that is, that's when you sort of have two telescopes and they can infer an image as if the telescope was as big as the distance between them, which is a really cool function of how light works. And so what you could maybe do is put a big telescope on one side of the solar system and a big telescope on the other side of the solar system. and create an effective telescope, the diameter with the resolving power of a telescope, the diameter of the solar system. And again, this is way out there. This is 50 years in the future. But it's something like this, and then maybe you'll get images of those planets and see, do they have continents? Do they have trees? Maybe there's a giant whale that's the size of this, province or a state. We don't know. But I think there's, if we get that amount of telescope power, you'll discover some just completely mind-blowing things that will change the philosophy of the world. And I think that's what we can look forward to. We don't know what it is, but something really big and cool will come down the scientific pipes that will change, humanity's view of the universe and of itself.
Those are really interesting answers. I really like what you're talking about, interferometry, because the recent black hole image from the Event Horizon Telescope, that was interferometry. It was a series of telescopes, radio telescopes, around the world that effectively created a telescope as large as the Earth. So, yes, we're several decades away from getting a solar system-wide telescope, but it's not as far away as some people think, right?
Yeah, and technology is kind of interesting like that. We think of technology having this linear progression where things tend to get better and better, and that's really not how it works. So things tend to stay the same for a while, and then you get Hubble, and then you get amazing. Then we get used to that level of amazingness, and things tend to not change. And then we get JWST, James Webb Space Telescope, and then you'll get this boost again. So I find like science comes in leaps. It's not this general growing, and it goes with the Mars rovers too. Like if you look at the generations of Mars rovers, like between Sojourner and Spirit and Curiosity, like Spirit and Opportunity, those two rovers weren't a little bit better. They were 100 times better than the previous generation. And then if you look at Perseverance and Curiosity, those rovers aren't twice as good as Spirit and Opportunity. They're like 50 times as good. And so that's one thing I really love about science and the progression of sort of the human frontier is it's not linear, but it may seem slow, but it's these jumps that it's to me, that's what makes it fantastic to live in the time we do. And that's what I get a rush from, is seeing these bursts of technological advance. And we have them in our daily lives as well, with the computer, and then we had the personal computer, and then the internet. Like it changed our lives drastically, and it was very quick. And then we think, oh, nothing's happened in a while. iPhone, boom. And so who knows what's next? Maybe it's Neuralink. I don't know. But that's the fantastic thing about being alive now, is it's not this, it may seem boring, but then you get a giant leap. And I always look forward to those leaps. And right now, one of the most exciting ones that I found is, moving to electric cars and driverless cars. One day we don't have them, and then tomorrow you'll have robo-taxi fleets. You never know.
I think you may have a good career in futurism if this whole astronomy thing doesn't work out. Although it sounds like the astronomy thing's working out. So, futurists, I don't think you're going to get John A. Reed on this time. But you also said an interesting thing earlier on about about discovering life on planets by looking at light from a star that's passing through an atmosphere. And then you talked about how now we can start to build up eventually a catalog of places that have life. I think that is so important, because right now we have one data point for where life is, what life is like, how to find it, and that's us, right? As soon as we get that second, third, fourth data point, even if it is microbial life, that's going to go a long way into figuring out how likely is it that life springs up? How likely is it that intelligent life springs up? That may be a real revolution in astronomy.
Absolutely. And I really do think, that there's life somewhere else in the solar system. Again, this is just speculation, but like when we get a probe that can dive into the ice at Europa, if there's life down there, there's your second data point, and it'll really revolutionize maybe even the history of life itself. If you're familiar with panspermia theory, and or hypothesis, I'm not sure if it's an actual theory yet, high bar for theory in science. Um, anyway, so that's the theory that, let's say life originated on one of Jupiter's moons, an asteroid hits it, and then it seeds the other planets. That life, travels on the asteroid, lands on Mars or lands on Earth, and that's how Earth got its life. So that's panspermia. And so this discovering life somewhere else in the solar system would, could possibly confirm that and make it a theory and not just an idea.
Well, and that two data points of life within our own solar system should mean that life is very easy to develop on any solar system.
Man, especially when we estimate that planets outnumber the stars, and there's 300 to 400 billion stars in our galaxy, and there's 300 to 400 billion catalog galaxies. It's like the numbers are just, and if there's multiple places where there's life in our solar system, then the number of places where there's life in a galaxy, you're talking trillions, not just billions of planets with life. It could be trillions. And that should really hurt your brain.
You might even say that the numbers are astronomical.
Yeah, marginally astronomical, yeah.
Oh, that's great, John. This is really nice pontificating on life and thinking about what's out there. I want to ask you, though, given the chance, would you go into space? Would you go to orbit? Would you go to the moon? Would you go farther than that, given the chance? What would be your, if you were given the golden ticket, what would you do?
Yeah, so I'm pretty opinionated on that. I'm opinionated on a lot of things, especially this one. So would I go to space? Yes, but I wouldn't take a Soyuz. Or maybe even, something like SpaceX's one without, a bathroom. I'll go to space when it's like taking an airplane. You get in at the terminal, you take off like an airplane. I don't want to blast off like a rocket. That just seems terrifying. Take off in an airplane, maybe a carrier airplane. The spacecraft would drop down, like the Stratolaunch system is one that exists now. The rocket drops down and then takes off and goes into space. And then ideally lands again like an airplane. None of this rocket propulsion, propulsive landings or stuff that's like, like an amusement park ride from hell. And I think we'll get to that sooner than we think as well. So, Elon Musk has Starship, which hypothetically could take 100 people at once. So that's like a 737. I'm not sure that's going to be the best approach because, that takes off and lands, with rockets, but maybe someone, maybe someone will copy that. Maybe they'll do it in a way that's very friendly to the air traveler. And that is what will take them to space, without the freak outness of a rocket launch. And I think on a 50-year time horizon, I think we'll get there. And that's also how I think you'll get people to colonize the moon and to colonize Mars in mass, is to make it like air travel. And I don't think that's out of the question. And the other thing that and this is almost a rant. We always think of, we're preparing to go to Mars. It's going to be a 6-month journey there and then 6 or 8 months back. And we're like, well, you're going to be weightless for all that time. And that's going to be terrible. And it's going to have this huge effect on the human body and you're going to get irradiated and all that stuff. I think all those factors are trivial. Here's what's going to happen. By the time humans are ready to go to Mars, this spaceship is going to be huge. It's going to be a massive rocket. And like launch costs are going down. We can put lots of crap into space. You're going to have all the radiation shielding you need. Like you're not going to launch to Mars with inferior radiation shielding. You're just not. That's going to exist. And then there's 2 things that I think, putting my futures hat on, that will prevent the gravity thing from being a factor. Number one, hypothetically, you could put a big counterweight on the end of your spacecraft, and as you go through space, spin. Give yourself, you got the spaceship on one end like this, and your people, can walk around there. Give them 0.1 gravity, something, and then you eliminate all these medical problems associated with 0G. Maybe you're dealing with 0.1 G or 0.3 G, but you're still gonna have to exercise. But it's not 0G, and then you can drink your coffee like a normal person. And the other thing that might shorten the trip to Mars is if we're using continuous continually accelerating rockets like a Casimir engine or an ion engine, right? You're going to get to Mars in 8 weeks. Then you don't need to worry about, muscle atrophy and everything. It's because your trip is just that much shorter. And so I feel like one of those two things is going to happen when we're finally ready to send humans to Mars in mass. And then you're not going to have to worry. There's a lot of problems you're just not going to have to worry about because they'll take care of themselves. And so I would definitely go to Mars in that scenario, which I think is in our lifetime, maybe near the end, but you know what I mean?
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that's one of those big leaps that's going to happen just all of a sudden, right? We're going to be talking about, oh, hey, we're going back to the moon, and hopefully this decade we go back to the moon, and then it'll be, oh, okay, now there's a rocket launching to Mars. Oh, now there's people launching. It's going to be that, just like you said, those big steps out of nowhere, seemingly out of nowhere. Yeah. So that's great, John. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to ask you, and we're at about 45 minutes. Which is amazing. So I honestly don't want to cut a single thing out of everything that you've said. So that was really awesome. So thank you for being a guest today. This was a lot of fun. It's been really interesting to hear your perspective.
Absolutely, Ryan. Thanks for having me. And thanks for doing what you do as well, like being a science communicator and making content for the general, for everybody. I mean, the stars belong to everyone. And that's something that, people like you and me need to hammer home. There are no barriers to this hobby at all. Like the stars are yours, and there's so much out there to learn, and most of it there's no cost. No one's charging you. No one's trying to scam you either. At least I hope not. Like it's all free. It's all accessible. All the knowledge is out there. There's no one stopping you. And follow your dreams. Shoot for the stars. Maybe you'll hit the moon. Just go for it. If you need help or you're ever discouraged, reach out to me, reach out to the people that support you, and whatever your goals are, like it's probably not impossible.
Could you tell me how we would be able to find you if somebody saw this and wanted to ask you some questions and get in touch with you, even about your books? How would they do that?
Absolutely. So I'm pretty easy to find. If you Google me, add the A, John A. Reed. Otherwise, you'll get some crazy person. So I'm at Learn to Stargaze. So 2 spelled T-O. And, I'm also at www.learntostargaze.com. And that'll take you to my business website. And that's pretty much it. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it. I'll be there.
So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Astroviews, the show where we talk to interesting people about their connection with the universe. I hope you enjoyed our interview with John A. Reed. That was really fantastic, and I hope you come back and see us again soon. Thanks for tuning in. People think that it can be very difficult to do astronomy without a telescope or without binoculars or without this expensive equipment. But really, all you need is your eyes and your curious mind. And to help that, Astronomy in Action has come up with our own space club. And this isn't a space club where you need a telescope or binoculars or to stay up all night. In partnership with slew.com, we give you access to remote telescopes all over the world so that when you feel the time is right, you can pop online and look through one of their huge telescopes that they have in these perfectly clear dark sky sites around the world. You can take your own images, learn about different objects through quests and challenges, and have a lot of fun as part of our community. If you'd like to join, go to astronomyinaction.com/spaceclub. We hope to see you there.